Earth, and it feels like your body, your arms and legs are being torn apart into a million pieces. But that's the inner spiritual experience of it. But that's the prelude to sort of being reborn, reconnected with your true center.
And you talked a little bit about George Bush and so forth, and what I see with all of this, debacle going on is that I see it, in the end at least, as a positive signal for the reasons that you just mentioned, because we can see when these kind of archetypal figures actually come in to, basically all our lives, and many people are, very obsessed by this and spend a lot of their time actually, reading about it and being annoyed by it and whatnot. But for me, it seems to be a positive sign. It's a good thing that things are changing and things are happening, and this might actually finally lead people up to a point where they're kind of, start to awaken to these kind of ideas. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. It is a sign that we've reached the polar extreme in the great cycle, the great cycles of change, beginning with sort of the pure essence of spiritual being, and then moving through the cycle phase of descent into increasing materialism and spiritual darkness. We end up at the end of that phase with a ruler who is exemplifying the pinnacle of ego, presenting itself as the true center and source, and so on. So I take it as a good sign too, in that we are correctly located at the end of the descent phase and are about to turn the corner. And also from a psychological perspective, when somebody like this manifests, it's almost a good psychological and spiritual exercise for us to then do the work on our own spiritual paths, to reclaim those projections.
Well, exactly, because everything is not going to turn around once we've passed 2012 and everything is going to be good again. We have to do something about it, right?
Yeah, that is I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is the biggest misnomer, and it's the first question that often comes up. What's going to happen in 2012? Well, there's assumptions built into that question. Number one, we live in a predetermined, predestined world. It's kind of like, and to a certain extent, there's a general framework that's predictable. Like you can say that, well, the galactic alignment's going to happen in 2012. Well, what does that mean? It's like saying the sun is going to come up tomorrow. That's certainly true. It's not really a prophecy. It's just an understanding of how the cycles work. But what actually happens for each individual depends on whether or not a person opens their eyes.
Yeah.
The sun could come up tomorrow and you can keep your eyes closed, and that's a very different experience than if you opened them.
Yeah, exactly. That's absolutely right. Hey, listen, I want to kind of, shift gears a little bit and run a completely another thing by you here. I don't know if you're familiar so much with Hopi prophecy. Again, we mentioned this at the beginning of the program when we talked about the documentary that you were in, that mainly talked about Hopi prophecy and a little bit about the Mayan too. But there is an interesting comet out there right now called Holmes, or 17P /Holmes, something like that. Anyway, when I saw pictures of this, by the way, some background on this is growing actually larger than the sun now. That's the latest news on this comet. And for some reason, the corona is expanding, and they don't know actually why this is, but there it is, and this is happening. And I connected this very much with the prophecy about the blue Kashina. And I just wanted to run this by you and see if you have any ideas or thoughts about this.
Well, that sounds fascinating, and I certainly don't have all the answers, and I am familiar with the Blue Star prophecy of the Hopi, and that would be very, very fascinating. If now, do you know what part of the sky that's coming from?
I don't have the details in front of me, but that should be easily taken care of. I can send you a link probably afterwards, and I can link that up also, by the way, on our info page, so people can find that really easily. But yeah.
I guess generally, and I think that these things are interesting. Comets have always been signs of some kind of change. I think that it's the message that's trying to come through, that's trying to get through to human beings, is the very idea that there is this higher reality, that there is something out there above us that can make a difference for us. What I think this is kind of about is a distant remembering, a distant memory that although we live in an incredibly materialistic society and world today, we have a distant memory of a time or a state of consciousness in which we are in tune with the higher wisdom, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
And so a comet comes in and it reminds us that there's something that we can experience and open up to that comes from a higher place.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's sort of one way to think about it.
Exactly. I mean, I've even heard stories that the Rosicrucians and other secret societies actually was formed after the event of a comet coming in, and this kind of spurred people to change their ways and trying to do something on a spiritual level. So I mean, it is a sign of something, at least,
Well, for example, the great Indian saint and mystic Muktananda, he wrote about his spiritual awakening, and at a certain point in his sadhana, his meditation practice, he started to visualize a blue pearl, he called it, the center of his mind, appearing, from the higher planes or something like that.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I just read this online here. It says, look for a golden fuzzball in the constellation Perseus after sunset. This is from NASA.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I will have to look for that. I'm very interested in that.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's heading towards us. Oh no.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll see what happens here. But it's interesting because again, as we began this program, that program, that I was talking about, the documentary, the Fifth Gate, had a big impact on me, and the idea of the blue Kashina really did stick with me, and this is something that I know that there is a Hopi elder, I can't remember his name now, that appears in the documentary, and he talks very much about this, that when the blue Kashina arrives, that it will signal the beginning of the changing, stages. So it's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
One thing, again, shifting gears to another topic here, because I read this just before the program here on your website, that you actually were served as a literary executor for or a finished translation of something called the Key to the Kalevala.
Yes.
Would you care to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it does connect into the Maya work. Early on in my work, before I got involved in the 2012 question, I studied the math and the philosophy in the 260-day calendar, and I basically determined the three core principles inside of it, three sacred science principles. Now, my work with Finnish mythology goes back to Hamlet's Mill, actually. They talked about the mythology of the Kalevala and the polar region as a great kind of, basically in Finland they call it the Sampo. It's the magic mill. And it's in the far north, the pole star is almost straight overhead, so the sky has a spinning merry-go-round kind of effect.
Yeah.
But if you're living close to the equator, the sky actually looks more like a spinning barrel, because like you're inside of a spinning barrel, because the pole star is close to the horizon. So these different dynamics between sky watchers in the far north and sky watchers at the equator was very interesting to me. And I became aware of the work of a Finnish mystic named Pekka Ervast, who died in the 1930s, but he wrote an amazing interpretation of his country's national epic called the Kalevala, which is a reservoir of oral tradition that was recorded in the last century by wandering folklorists going around to the pack peddlers and collecting stories and so on. And the Kalevala is an incredible treasure trove of ancient knowledge and stories and magic. There's charms and hexes and so on, and there's also cosmological lore. The three main Kalevala heroes are these, there's the primordial sage, and there's the primordial smithy, and then there's a kind of a carousing Arctic Don Juan sort of character, carousing around and dancing with the women and so on. Well, Urvast interpreted these three characters as representing the three evolutionary forces inside of each human being, basically intellect, will, and emotion.
Interesting.
So I found that this was a beautiful framework for understanding human spiritual unfolding, and it did apply to these three sacred science principles that I had found inside of the Maya calendar. But the book came out in '99. The Key to the Kalevala is now translated into English, and I'm happy to have been involved in facilitating that translation. It's an amazing mystical book of Urvasts on the Kalevala. But I was also involved with an elder Finnish-American translator named Eino Freiberg, and after he passed away, they appointed me the executor for his literary estate, and we were able to use his translation for the parts of the Kalevala in the book. So
interesting. Yeah, because I brought it up also because I know that the Kalevala is something that allegedly J.R. Tolkien was very much influenced by when he wrote his epic story of Lord of the Rings, that very much talk about the different ages and even different ages of man and other creatures, as it were. And I don't know if there's any kind of connection there in any way to the work that you did on the Key to Kalevala, but it's an interesting fact. Do you know if they talk about ages and things like that in the Key to Kalevala?
Yeah. In fact, that's a fascinating area I've been interested in too. That Tolkien was inspired by the Kalevala. In fact, Gandalf in the Tolkien epic is based upon the primordial sage Vainamoinen. He's called Vainamoinen in the Kalevala.
Yeah.
He's the primordial sage. He has wisdom, and he's the one who gets things done. And at the end of the Kalevala, in the 50th chapter, or Runo, Vainamoinen has to relinquish his status as the ruler because Christianity's coming in. So there's also these sort of historical echoes. But in a similar way, in the Tolkien books, Gandalf had to relinquish, at some point he lets himself go, right?
Yeah,
he disappears or something, yeah.
Exactly, for a short period of time at least, to return later as Gandalf the White,
That's right.
A transformation has taken place, and he comes back renewed, I guess.
That's right. And that's kind of a metaphor for how the perennial wisdom disappears from the face of the earth periodically.
For a short...
goes into hiding.
Yeah.
Retracts back into the roots, and it cannot be seen. In the same way that Shambhala, the mythical kingdom in Tibet or Central Asia, disappears. It's because what's behind this is that consciousness of the perennial wisdom, or the consciousness that is required in order to see Shambhala, is no longer prevalent on the face of the earth because humanity is moving into a period of greater darkness. But when that consciousness, that unity consciousness, gets restored, then all of a sudden Shambhala reappears.
That's interesting, and I guess we also have to learn to look at it that this is it's a natural process of how things work in this universe. I mean, we have night and we have day. That doesn't mean that any of these periods are evil or bad, but they have different attributes that we have to